Hello, friends, and welcome to the January 26th edition of Weekly Witness, Texas Impact's weekly opportunity for mainstream Texans of faith to learn about policy issues here in our great state and have a conversation about how you can engage in that process. My name is Scott Atnip, your host and Texas Impact's Director of Public Witness, and we have an exciting program for you today as we welcome Beaman Floyd. Beaman is Texas Impact's outside legislative counsel, and he's here to talk with us about the Texas legislative landscape as we move into the new year and maybe more importantly into election season. We'll also be joined by Texas Impact's B. Moorhead and Josh Houston later in the program to discuss that legislative landscape and the role Texans of faith can play. And we'll open the episode today with the return of one of your favorite segments, the weekly word from one of my favorite Texas faith leaders, Reverend Franz Schimmel from Messiah Lutheran Church in Weatherford, Texas, and president of the Texas Impact Board of Directors. I'm especially excited that Franz will be opening up this episode because he was the driving force behind Texas Impact's Clergy Mondays way back in 2017, which eventually led to the weekly witness program that we have today. But before we get to Franz, I want to take a moment to talk about Weekly Witness. Y'all, the creation of this podcast and the programming has been quite a journey, and you all have made an incredible difference in the political discourse in Texas. And because we know 2022 will be such an important year for democracy in Texas, we feel like it's the perfect time to step up our Weekly Witness game, and we're going to need your help. It's no longer just me and a Zoom recording. We now have a professional team led by Texas Impact's communications coordinator, David Vasallo, some gear and some new segments. So we're doing our part to step up our game, and we hope we can count on you to step up yours. Here's how you can help. First, make sure that you're subscribed in your favorite podcast feed, Apple, Spotify, wherever you find your podcasts. We won't have a regularly scheduled opportunity for you to watch Weekly Witness by Zoom because we're recording it several times during the week, which will allow us to bring in more guests and have a higher quality program, but it means you Zoomers will need to subscribe to get the content sent directly to you. Next, give us a rating and review, and then share this content. I know I say it all the time, but y'all, this year is important. Civic engagement by Texans of faith is vital this year, and we're going to need as many people as possible active and engaged. I'm excited about the possibilities for Weekly Witness in 2022, but at the end of the day, this is your podcast. We want to know what you think about the new format, about how we can best resource you and your congregation to be effective advocates this year. So send us your thoughts and ideas to scott@texasimpact.org. So with those programming notes at the top, here we go. The Weekly Word with Reverend Franz Schimmel.
Welcome. I'm Pastor Franz Schimmel. I'm the pastor at Messiah Lutheran Church in Weatherford, Texas. I serve on the board of Texas Impact and have been fortunate enough to be asked to serve as the chairman of the board for a term. I wanted to share with you today some words from the prophet Isaiah in chapter 61. He writes about himself, "The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me. He has sent me to bring good news to the oppressed, to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and release to the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Jesus, when he visited his hometown synagogue in Nazareth, also quoted this text and used it as a way of describing his ministry, a ministry of bringing good news to the poor. As Isaiah and Jesus thought about themselves and their distinctive work given to them by God, I think we can think of ourselves as people of faith, supporters of the ministry of Texas Impact or other advocacy work that you might be doing. That the distinctive voice that people of faith have is to be concerned for those who are oppressed and brokenhearted and poor and in prison, people who do not otherwise have a voice of their own that is always heard or the ability to make themselves heard. We are all in this together, I think, meaning all in this life together, that we are knit together in a common destiny. As Dr. King said, injustice anywhere means there's injustice everywhere. But not everyone in the thinking about the work they do is mindful, or maybe none of us are perhaps naturally mindful of those who are missing out. But I think that we have a responsibility, people of faith, to be looking around and saying, in a time of great abundance and great goodness, is there anybody who is not participating? Is there anybody who's still uh, suffering in a way that is unfair uh, or not as it should be? And when we lay eyes on that situation, then to bring those situations to the light of our communities, and especially those who govern and lead. I encourage you to, in the work that you're doing then, in your hometowns and communities and in our state, to keep your eyes open, to not always presume that everything is going well for everyone. And for those you find who are in need, to make yourself available to be a voice for them. Those who are having, just some examples. Right now we have concerns about access to voting. So I think we should be people of faith and advocate for those who have trouble accessing the voting system, because everyone's voice is important and should be heard. We still have many people in our state of Texas who have difficulty accessing medical care. And this, my friends, should not be so. There are some here in a state like Texas who are able to get some of the finest care available on the whole face of this earth, and yet others who still find it difficult even to get an appointment with a doctor. And there are others, concerns for people who are imprisoned. We have a gigantic and sprawling prison system in this state. Does the average person have any idea what happens within those prisons, or how those prisoners are treated, or what their needs are when they come out of prison? I would say most are not thinking about it. But Jesus and Isaiah and all the sages and teachers of the great faiths have always reminded that just because your life is good, it doesn't mean that everyone else's is. But that gives you then, with your eyes of faith, to see a responsibility for yourself, to reach out from your comfort of the place where you are and look into those places where folks are having difficulties. God bless you all. Thank you for your work.
This week's episode of Weekly Witness was brought to you by Methodist Healthcare Ministries of South Texas.
Welcome back. For longtime Weekly Witness listeners and friends of Texas Impact, today's guest needs absolutely no introduction, but I am excited to welcome to the program Beaman Floyd, Texas Impact's outside legislative counsel and president of the Texas Impact Foundation, and general guru of all things Texas legislature. So, Beaman, thanks for joining us. How's your start to the new year?
Well, so far so good. I am participating in the American phenomenon of COVID right now. I am quarantined out in a cabin in the hill country, but otherwise doing great.
Well, I am glad you're doing well and hope that continues to be the case. So let's go ahead and jump right in. We are a couple weeks away from early voting in the primary elections, which begin February 14th, leading up to Election Day on March 1st. So first, can you give us a general lay of the land in terms of the Texas political space?
Well, sure. I mean, the Texas political space is reflective of our national space. As you know, we came out of a legislative session this last time that was pretty divisive. I think it is fair to say. We had a lot of very difficult partisan issues in Texas that dominated our news cycles, and we had legislation that actually affected elections. That it will be in play in the coming elections, and they'll be in play in two ways. One is what the laws actually said, which create some issues with people who have traditionally either worked at elections or voted, especially if they're voting in non-traditional ways, like mail-in ballots, et cetera. That being said, people should know people should vote confidently, should work at the polls confidently if they choose to do so. They should inform themselves about the new laws. And that's something that Texas Impact has been up to. One of the things that greatly concerns me is that there are a lot of rumors about what those laws do that really transcend what the laws did. There are people who are saying, I'm not going to mess with it because I'm scared because I think I could do something wrong. And I don't know, Scott, we would strongly encourage people not to do that, instead to get informed and know what the new law is and get out there and vote. This is Texas and the United States of America. You are free to vote. You are free to work in democracy and work in the polls. You just kind of have to know what you're doing. But I don't think people should be afraid to exercise their rights.
And that was one of the themes, as you know, because you participated virtually. We just wrapped up the Texas United Methodist Women's Legislative event. And without coordinating, it seemed like most speakers talked about the importance of participating in democracy, participating in elections. And that election infrastructure is vital right now, right?
You bet. Yeah, it really is. And what's at stake is vital. And you and I have had this conversation a little bit over the years. As you know, I am not disposed to say, "Oh, this is the most important election in our lifetime." You know, that's cable news thing. I'll leave that to them. But I'm feeling unusually strongly about these elections, and I'll tell you why. I think that qualitatively, these elections are really important. We have a lot of traditional structures of democracy in Texas that really need some care and maintenance. And what that means is that the discourse in the election has to be reflective of those priorities. If we leave these elections to these very divisive sort of splash material subjects, I am very concerned that we're going to continue to ignore some real structural issues in Texas, like public education and state agencies and public health and that kind of thing. And those things aren't just running themselves right now. They need care and maintenance from policymakers. They need attention from voters. And so I think we need really good participation in the election process so that we can raise the level of discourse and really get at some of the things that we need to be working on, instead of this consumer political issues, I think, that have dominated the news cycles.
Well, it's interesting that you talk about that participation, because we're coming up to the primary elections, and you hear Josh say all the time that 95% of the elections in Texas are decided in the primaries, but that's where the lowest number of people participate. And so those are coming up soon. So it's important that people are paying attention. So I'm curious for our listeners, for you to just talk some about what you're watching. And because there will be so many kind of high-profile, hot races on the Republican side of the aisle. Let's start there. What are you watching for in the Republican primary this spring?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's kind of interesting if you and forgive me, I'll sort of flip your question a little bit. If you go to the general election, the Republicans are expecting to actually pick up seats in the Texas House in particular. We're also going to have a lot of new members in the Texas Senate, at least 5. New members in the Texas Senate, which is a really big turnover in a body that tends to sort of keep its members for a long time and is only composed of 31 people. The Republican primary is quite interesting, right? Because there are a whole lot of new candidates running to the right of incumbent candidates. There are a whole lot of just new candidates running. And so I want to emphasize this, and I will always emphasize this every time. Texas Impact is a nonpartisan group. The Texas Impact Foundation is a nonpartisan organization. And I, Beaman Floyd, am a nonpartisan lobbyist for reals. Like, I absolutely mean that. I think there are good and well-meaning candidates from any of the parties that get people elected here in Texas. And so this is not a partisan comment, but right now the sort of really divisive politics lives in the party space. And part of what you're seeing in the Republican Party is a lot of people trying to run against each other on the basis of these partisan issues, many of which, again, I feel strongly are a distraction from some of the core structural issues that we have in the state that we need to be addressing.
And I guess along those lines, some really thoughtful people retiring, right? And I think that further emphasizes the importance of this primary election to make sure that we're returning some thoughtful people who care about legislating. Right.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we said during the Methodist conference that you mentioned at the top is that the public makes politics. I mean, we make the political space where people run and where people have developed their idea of what they need to do to get elected or not. So I think a really important introspective and maybe confessional question that we need to ask ourselves is, are we making good politics or are we not making good politics as people, as the public? And I think it's incumbent on anybody, and I'm not talking about political people, I'm talking about the citizens of Texas, to just make better politics, to make a better public discourse where people who are running, one, really good candidates want to run for office, and two, the people running for office want to have a higher level debate about the issues facing Texas.
I want to get to the Democratic side in a second because we brought in this section by talking about the Republican side of the primaries. What is it? But I feel like I can't just drop what you just said because I think a lot of us will be wondering what does it take for us to make good politics? What is our role in that, and what does it look like when we're doing it well?
Public discourse and public participation. And I think people just participating, more of our community value participating. A question any person of faith that I would ask is, what is the difference? Is there a difference between your political participation in your political speech and your community participation in your community speech, right? So if you're at your congregation with your faith group and you're talking about the issues of the day that need to be addressed either by your faith communities or by the government or both, your conversation should be the same in your community as it is in your political life and political discourse. If it's different, think about that, right? Because if it's more confrontational or more divisive or absent in the political space, this is really about a collision between community and our political space. They should really have the same values and have the same quality of discourse. If they don't, then we're making bad politics, or at least artificial politics.
Right.
And our politics and our community interests have to really be the same thing. And so I would say that. And then the second thing I would say is that when you're in the political space and when you're talking, have some guardrails or boundaries for politicians who are talking to you. One of the things I say very frequently, Scott, as you know, is when a politician says they're going to go fight for you, I consider saying, I'm not hiring you to go fight. I'm hiring you to go learn and work and do and be principled and maybe be against some policy projects or issues. But that's a different thing than just hiring them to fight.
Right.
You know, you should hire them to go do good policy. And that should be collaborative most of the time.
Well, it seems like there are some in that political space who are really looking for a fight right now, and a lot of other people who are just tired. Right. There's been so much going on over the course of the last few years. They're just done. And so I guess my fear is that, well-meaning, good, thoughtful people are just going to sit out, especially during the primaries. Right. So I think that's an important word.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I guess my counteroffer to those feelings would be if you've got a hole in the roof of your house, or if God forbid your house is on fire, if there's an urgency facing you about a task that needs to be done, and I strongly feel like there is a real growing urgency in some of our core tasks that need to be done, and you went looking for help for that task, would you go and get people who were exhausted to the point of going to sleep on you, or people who just basically were more interested in fighting each other than actually forming a bucket brigade, right?
Right.
And we just can't afford it. We can't afford either to be violently divisive with one another politically, nor can we afford to be exhausted.
Yeah.
We got to make a bucket brigade.
And I think that's right. And I think that's the homework assignment for listeners is to bring the bucket brigade of thoughtful, well-reasoned people into this process and have them participate. So we did talk briefly about the Republican side. Anything in particular you're watching on the Democratic side of the primaries?
The short answer is not as much, and part of that is just because we have a fairly strong Democratic incumbency. I mean, there are obviously a few races where the needle is moving one way or the other, where you've got some real primary issues in the races. But in general, a lot of what we're looking at is really more about the different facets of the Republican Party and how they're sort of sorting themselves out than it is about the Democratic Party, and sort of more interested in seeing how the Democrats and Republicans together perform in the general election, because again, it has to do with bettering the level of discourse. And let me be blunt. In terms of the quality of the discourse and real talk about real issues, both parties need to do better. And when I say need to do better, I need to do a lot better in terms of being really serious about the issues that are facing us. And instead of just vilifying one thing or another thing, or saying all government is bad or all corporations are bad or whatever, they need to really start talking about real live issues and educating the public about what we're working on, and then talking about those things.
Now, Beaman, you know our folks well, and you know that they like homework. So I wonder what you can leave our listeners with today. What do you hope they'll do in the next couple of weeks, next couple of months?
Have a personal conversation with candidates, and pick your level. If it's a school board or city council or county commissioner or state elected official or congressional candidates or senatorial candidate, I don't care. Have an actual personal conversation with a candidate and tell them that you think, if you think this, that this is serious and we need serious, good policy discourse about issues.
I want to add to that a little bit, because we are obviously at Texas Impact, we are biased towards talking with our state representatives because that's the space we work in. But those local elections are really important this time. I mean, they're always really important, but they seem especially important this year, to me anyway.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that I don't think that you can discount any level of government at this point. I think that there's, and part of that also is that the different levels of government are where the bench of good candidates come from. There are people who will run for president in the very first election they ever run in and win. We have seen that phenomenon right here in the United States of America. There are people who basically start by volunteering on the volunteers subzoning B committee at the city and, labor in that. So they don't even get elected at first. They learn the ropes by just going and working. And that is a wonderful way to develop really good candidates and people who understand the stakes of government at every level. And we think that those races are important. We think the people who are willing to work in that space are really important, and they should be supported, and they should be in conversation with their communities.
Well, Beaman, really appreciate the time today. As always, you are a source of wisdom and an inspiration to all of us. I really appreciate the work you do on behalf of a better Texas every day, and hope you feel better, man.
Thanks. And, always kudos to Texas Impact. You guys are great, and the work you're doing is super important. Thanks.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to welcome to the conversation two of my friends and colleagues, our Executive Director, B. Moorhead. Hey, B.
Hey, Scott.
And Texas Impact's Advocacy Director, Josh Houston, friend of the program. Hey, Josh.
Hey, good to be here.
So, Josh, we did just listen to a conversation with Beaman Floyd. And one of the things that we've been talking about over the course of the last few weeks is the need for more people to participate in the process and do so in a way that is not fighting with each other. So your quick reflections on Beaman's conversation.
Yeah, I think he was dead on. I mean, the thing about a fight is this. If you get into a fight, everybody gets punched.
Ouch.
And that means everybody takes damage. And we have democratic processes. It doesn't have to be that way. Like, you don't have to have a situation where everybody takes damage. You have to be able to compromise, though, and we have to absolutely stop making other Americans, quote unquote, the enemy.
So, along those same lines, how can Texans of Faith be leaders in that process?
I want to answer that by kind of going back to what Josh was talking about a second ago about fighting and damaging. Years ago, a professor at Austin Seminary, Manya Stubbs, spoke to a group of United Methodist women and preached them a sermon about a topic that is her topic of study, indebted love. And she talked about the concept of fighting to make up and fighting to break up. And she said, when a couple is fighting, you can see if they are fighting to make up or fighting to break up in the way they fight, the language they use. And in some cases, you can see that they are trying to work things through. They're trying to, because they love each other and they want to stay together. They want to be in community and relationship. Sometimes you can see a couple fighting and you can see that even if their differences are not as bad as they think they are having a fight to break up. They are trying to finally sever that connection. When we say fighting is one of those terms that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Where, I think everybody who was watching whatever that sports ball thing you guys were watching was just saying fight, right? But when we talk about the kinds of interactions we want people to have, we want to distinguish between fighting to make up, so having hard conversation, but loving conversation, really trying to understand the other person. What we've been talking about is really listening, really listening to what each other say, versus fighting to break up, just trying to drive a deeper and deeper wedge. And that, I think, is what I take away from what Beaman's been saying and what we've all been talking about.
So I think the question I might have is, we can talk kind of philosophically about how Texans of Faith should participate in this process. I think hopefully we all agree that we shouldn't do so in a way that seems like fighting. But what does it look like in kind of concrete ways to participate in the democratic process in helpful ways?
It's feeling a little bit like stump the advocates when you ask it that way. I'll start just by saying the one of the most helpful things that people can do is do the next right thing. So instead of trying to get to 30,000 feet and make yourself a 5-year plan and try to figure out what your one best way to maximize your precious time and money and all of those things, don't do that. Just do the next right thing. If someone wants you to volunteer for the weekend to do an activity, don't spend all your time thinking about whether it's the best use of your time. Is it a good use of your time? It is a good thing to do, then do it. And so I think that realignment from what's the best thing I can do to what's the next right thing I could do.
Yeah, I mean, my thought, Scott, is that we didn't get here overnight, and we're not going to get out of this overnight either. It's going to take several election cycles, and that means staying engaged through several election cycles. It means a commitment to a little d democratic way of life. There's a Mark Twain quote that drives me nuts. He said kind of glibly that politicians are like diapers, that they need to be changed frequently and for the same reasons. It is too cynical. I certainly know incumbents that need to be replaced. I know incumbents that are great. I've worked with them. I know candidates that are great, and I know candidates that have no business in office. It really is person by person. You can't have that point of view, because if you just go in there and you vote anti-incumbent because you're mad, that's not data that any elected official can then use from the returns about what it is the democracy thinks and what direction it should go. That's just a signal to fight. So it really is up to voters, because let's be clear. I mean, they may not be like diapers, but they are similar to windsocks at an airport. That's the way we designed it, to really do what it is the voters told them to do at the ballot box in the previous cycle. So it really is up to voters to make elected officials courageous if you want them to be courageous, because right now they're behaving the way they're behaving because some people are showing up at the ballot box and some people who want them to be courageous aren't.
And I think Beaman's homework assignment for us for this week is to meet with a candidate and to have an actual conversation with a candidate. And that's how we learn those things, and that's how we engage in that process. Anything else you'd leave folks with today?
No, he was dead on about that. That's exactly what professionals are doing, is we are looking at what is on the ballot. And that's what every Texas voter should also be doing, is figuring out who's on their ballot. And so, we, Texas Impact, we're watching 181 legislative seats in the statewide races. But for you at home, we really hope that you pull your ballot way in advance, not just like a week before you go to the polls. Right now, go to your county elections office website. They almost all have a place where you can put your address in. It will populate what is on your ballot by your precinct all the way down to the smallest race. And we want you to look down ballot. There are 1,100 cities in Texas. There are 1,200 school districts, 254 counties. That means we're talking about 10,000 offices. So tens of thousands of candidates that are running at a local level that any statewide group like Texas Impact is not capable of in any way watching. But that also means you're empowered. The local level is where your vote and your voice and your contributions count the most. So you just have to have a conversation with these candidates. There's nobody who can do it for you. Democracy dies in darkness. There's no way that the media can pay attention to tens of thousands of candidates at a local level. That's where you have to engage.
I think the last thing I want to say is years ago, a lot of times people think, oh, what would I have to do to talk to a candidate? They're probably really busy. What would it mean to get a meeting with a candidate? It seems very intimidating. And number of years ago, when my kids were in elementary school, after school, I was in the house and the kids were playing at the park, and one of the other moms said, "Hey, the school board candidate for our area is at the park with her kids. You want to come over and chat?" And we sat on the grass in the park and had a meeting with that candidate. Having a meeting with a candidate is not, doesn't have to be intimidating, doesn't have to be formal. It was wonderful, and I would encourage you to try to find ways like that to connect.
B. Moorhead, Josh Houston, thank you both so much for the time. Elections are coming up, and I think I can speak for all of us when I say meet your candidate, spend some time having those conversations, and let's get to work. I want to thank our guests for today, Reverend Franz Schimmel, Beaman Floyd, B. Moorhead, and Josh Houston. And a special thanks to David Vassallo for helping us get up and running and producing this new version of Weekly Witness. But I especially want to thank you for tuning in, and I hope that this episode motivated all of us. We only have a few weeks to learn who's running for office, where they stand, who you support and how, and who you can drag to the polls with you. Let's be honest, y'all. Most people aren't paying attention to primary elections, and very few people will vote in them. So just by listening to this podcast, you're more up to date than most of the people you interact with. So I hope you'll take this as a personal challenge to do your homework and talk with your friends, and then encourage them to come vote with you. I encourage my friends in Sunday school class with breakfast tacos before we vote. So I hope you'll think creatively about how you can get the people you care about to the polls. And with that, it's time to draw this episode to a close. If you've stayed with us this long, you must have enjoyed the content, so I hope you'll share it with your friends and congregations and leave us a rating or review. That way, even more of your friends can find us and join in the movement for justice in Texas. And remember to keep an eye on Texas Impact's social media for upcoming announcements, or email me at scott@texasimpact.org with questions. And remember, if you appreciate Texas Impact and the Weekly Witness community, please make sure that you and your congregation are members of Texas Impact by going to texasimpact.org. Friends, these are unprecedented times, and 2022 is a consequential year. More than ever, the world needs Texans of faith active and engaged. So let's get to work.
Weekly Witness is a production of Texas Impact, engineered and produced by David Vassallo.